Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for this week's Come Follow Me lesson with the Mormon News Report podcast. My name is Jenny Noonan Dye, and I'm joining you from Provo, Utah, along with my husband, John Dye. He's the one responsible for all that you see on your screen, for those of you who are participating in the video, the live stream. As always, for those who are participating in real time here on our video stream, we'd love to hear from you, where you are, what stood out to you in your study this week, whether it's the first or 50th time you've read these verses, or even if you didn't read them at all. We get to as many comments as we can, just as we would if we were all gathered together in person. We like to try to use this space and time as a supplement to your other Come Follow Me studies, to sometimes take a deeper dive into at least one aspect of the lesson that stands out. We love having your participation and your feedback. I'd like to excuse my co-host for the Mormon News Report podcast, Brent Malone, in Detroit, as he tends to some family responsibilities, and welcome our good friend, our go-to for all the nitty-gritty and important stuff when it comes to our Come Follow Me study, the nuts and bolts, the quintessence of what we learn, all the way from California. It's Ben Bernards. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning and welcome everybody to another Mormon News Report Hour of Power. So glad to be here again. Welcome to any first-time listeners or participators that are here, or longtime class members. We're glad you're here. And like Jenny said, we want to add a deeper, slightly more challenging look into Come Follow Me in your gospel study. We want to be kind of that one more extra end of year concert or class play after you've already done all the back to school / graduation stuff.
Do you have more concerts left?
Yeah, the boys it's amazing how much stuff we have going on, considering that we've been at home for a year.
Mm-hmm.
But we're almost done.
Yeah, we're almost done. We've got one more thing. So, a finish line. One, not the finish line, a finish line. Good morning to Nancy, who's letting us know she's joining us this morning from West Jordan. It's nice to see you here. Thanks for being here. And thanks for letting us know that you're here. Today is Sunday, May 16th, in the year of our Lord, 2021. The lesson today is called That Which Is of God is Light, and it covers Doctrine and Covenants, sections 49 and 50. So only 2 sections, and they're not necessarily super long, not like one of these like, oh my goodness, there's 900 verses in this. But some really a potential to take some deep dives in a lot of areas here. Ben, what have you got for us today?
Well, especially from like a historical perspective, there's this absolutely beautiful section in the Come Follow Me supplementary materials. As you're going through the gospel library, when you see a section that says a link out to Revelations in Context, and it talks about Leman Copley and the Shakers. It is a wonderful kind of background expose as to who they were and what they did. So if you want to learn more, or if you'd like to learn a little bit more about it and them, please, highly, highly recommend it. But the lesson that we get from them, or at least one of the key takeaways that I want to focus on today, is the intersection between the Shakers and the Latter-day Saints and the problems that they had. So before we get into their story, I want to lead off with another similar story. And this is an actual true story that happened in my own life, and it might be somewhat familiar to some of you. So if anybody out there is listening or watching, and if this story is something that you have experienced, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So 3 parts. Part number 1, a member of the church that we will call Adam, he did the whole Latter-day Saint checklist thing. He went to seminary, went on a mission, got married in the temple. He came home and he learned something about church history that really didn't jive with his previous perspective. Maybe it was polygamy, or his learning about the book of Abraham or whatever. And he felt really shook. Like he felt like his testimony was absolutely shaken. That's part 1. Part 2 happened actually to a close family member of me. I was teaching a Sunday school class, and I was talking about the authorship of the Old Testament, where the Old Testament came from, and explaining from a literary perspective that when you look at the Old Testament, it is self-evident that there are multiple anonymous authors that pieced it together like a quilt.
Mm.
It was not one stream of consciousness from Genesis to Malachi. It's lots of different bits and pieces, which means there's a lot of contradictions. And when you go and look at the original manuscripts, you can actually literally see in different colored ink the stuff that was added and the different types of handwriting. And all of that got translated into English. And we all think that it's one, homogenous literary book, but that's not the case. So this shook her understanding, and she kept repeating, she's like, wait a minute, but the Bible is the word of God. And I'm like, I'm not saying that it isn't, but we need to understand where it came from. And it shook her understanding, and she had a really hard time with it. Story 3, you're sitting in a ward council, and a leader proposes an idea for a program. And it's a program that has some sort of a numerical value attached to it. Okay, maybe it's like home teaching, or a number of people a temple recommends, or kids going on missions, whatever, make up your own scenario. And then a person shares some sort of input explaining why that program is a bad idea. Now, version 1 of this story goes where the person that's sharing the input is the second counselor in the primary presidency. And she chimes up and she has some thoughts. Now, the other version of the story is the person that's sharing the input is a visiting high counselor, or maybe a member of the stake president. So with each of these 3 different scenarios, whether it's the Sunday school class learning about the Bible, maybe it's learning stuff about church history, or getting feedback from different people, they all have similar threads. And the idea is that when we have a belief that we held on to that was previously true, like the Shakers did, or like the people in the Book of Mormon when Lehi is coming to Jerusalem, when that gets challenged, when we are faced with new information, how do we respond? And what emotions do we feel, and how do we navigate that? And ultimately, it brings us to the final and such an incredibly difficult question that we're going to try to attempt to cover in the next 45 minutes. How do we discern truth from error? So with that lead up, I'd like to ask a question of Jenny and John, and also anybody from the class that's here. When was the last time that you felt that you were right, but it actually turned out to be wrong? You think of any examples in your life when you felt that way?
Almost every day.
Can you share?
Well, I can't think of a specific example other than that I like to learn. And learning often requires, a challenge of previously held either beliefs or assumptions. And so, I mean, gosh, this is almost a constant for me, and it can be uncomfortable, but yeah.
Okay. So I like what you said there about both beliefs and assumptions. And sometimes it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two, right? Because we rarely sit down and actually like dig in through our thoughts and say, okay, well, this is what I believe and this is just what I assume. And I also like how you mentioned how there are feelings associated with that. Why is it that we have these feelings that are attached to the beliefs, that when we get challenged with a belief, why do we feel anxiety or fear or discomfort when that belief gets challenged? What do you think?
I think a lot because culturally, we can tend to be conditioned to buy into the fact that our beliefs define us, or that they are permanent, that they are a permanent representation of who we are. And so if that gets challenged, that could mean, oh, something about me is fundamentally, I don't know, incorrect or wrong, or insert whatever sort of negative connotation. But when we it's that kind of intermingling of who we are, of our identity, of our even value or worth with those beliefs. And a lot of times, when we have a belief, especially something that is a very strong belief, that can help give us confidence. And it's not incorrect to say that it contributes to the kind of person we are. It's just that the idea that we are incorrect about it, or that it has evolved, can be scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I've heard it said that one of the common threads of humanity is our sense, we all share a sense of uh, self-worth. And that sense of self-worth is usually based on three fundamental principles. I am smart, I am capable, and I am a good person. So when we see information that reinforces our intelligence, I'm smart, our competence, our capability, or our morality, we like that information because it reinforces that notion. And when we receive information that challenges that says, maybe I'm not so smart, maybe I'm not so competent, or maybe I'm not such a good person, we feel threatened and we will respond almost with an animalistic nature to push that information away. So what does this have to do with Doctrine and Covenants section 50? So the background is there was this little community of people called the Shakers, and they were, well, that was kind of like a nickname that was given to them, kind of like Mormons, as we call us. But their idea was they were Christians. They believed in Jesus Christ. They believed in the Bible. They believed in the second coming. And they also believed in very strong manifestations of physical behavior when you're overcome by the Spirit, whether it was dancing, moving, shaking around, letting your body just move in any direction or say any kind of noise that came out of it because you were being, quote, overwhelmed by the Spirit. So some of these people learned about the Latter-day Saints. They learned about Joseph Smith, and they actually came and they joined the Mormon Church, and they brought that tradition with them. And that caused no small amount of concern. And so sections 49 and 50 is God speaking to the leaders and having them refute that information, and one man in particular, Leman Copley. Now, the end of the story for them wraps up quite simply. The majority of that Shaker community wound up rejecting what the people said and what the revelation said, and some of them actually joined and stayed with the Latter-day Saints. But this brings up a wonderful, interesting question, which is how do we deal with new outside information when we think that we're right, but we actually turn out to be wrong? So there is a beautiful pattern that pops up in the beginning of D&C section 50 of how God shows the early Latter-day Saints how they can approach this and some ways of discerning truth from error. Jenny, would you mind reading from us? This is D&C 50 verses 10 through 12.
Of course. And now come, saith the Lord by the Spirit, unto the elders of his church, and let us reason together, that ye may understand. Let us reason even as a man reasoneth, one with another face to face. Now when a man reasoneth, he is understood of man, because he reasoneth as a man. Even so will I, the Lord, reason with you, that you may understand.
Okay, thank you. So this is, I think, a very interesting use of language, because sometimes the scriptures can be very declarative and authoritative, right? Like scriptural language says, thus saith the Lord, here is what's right, here's what's wrong, I'm gonna lay everything out for you. But notice that in these verses, the language is a little bit more reconciliatory, a little bit more accommodating, where God's saying, hey, okay, let's reason this together face to face. Let me get down on your level. It's like he's saying, okay, you guys, let's talk about this. We need to think about this as equals. And I find that to be very instructive because it shows that there are multiple ways of discerning truth and multiple responsibilities that we have. Let's go to the next verses, please. We're going to have a little bit of a longer section here. God is going to kind of model this discourse with the leaders, reminding them of what their roles are and helping them understand. I'm going to go ahead and read most of this, Jenny, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. And I'd be interested to hear what things stand out to you. Okay, so this is D&C 50 verses 13 through 26. Wherefore, I, the Lord, ask you this question. Unto what were ye ordained? To preach my gospel by the Spirit, even the Comforter which was sent forth to teach the truth. And then you received ye spirits which ye could not understand, and received them to be of God. And in this are ye justified? Oh, behold, ye shall answer this question yourselves. Nevertheless, I will be merciful unto you. He that is weak among you hereafter shall be made strong. Now, side note, the context there is he's saying that a lot of these early saints, they felt these same spiritual manifestations with the Shakers, and some of them thought that it was okay. And the Revelations in context talks about that. But then the revelation continues. Where verily I say unto you, he that is ordained of me and sent forth to preach the word of truth by the Comforter in the spirit of truth, does he preach it by the spirit of truth or some other way? If it be some other way, it is not of God. And again, he that receiveth the word of truth, doth he receive it by the spirit of truth or some other way? If it be some other way, it is not of God. Now let me skip down to verses 22 and 23. Wherefore, he that preacheth and he that receiveth understand one another, and both are edified and rejoice together. And that which doth not edify is not of God, and is darkness. That which is of God is light. And he that receiveth light and continueth in God receiveth more light, and that light groweth brighter and brighter until the perfect day. Okay, let me stop right there. Jenny, anything stand out to you here? Anything interesting?
I mean, a lot does. And when I was, listening to it, I tend to use the audio function on the app to listen, but just the reminder that in verse 23, and that which doth not edify is not of God and is darkness. Because then that makes me wonder if is it the inverse or the inverse? I think it's the inverse. That if that's true, does that mean that anything that does edify is of God? Because we have a very we have kind of restrictions around what is of God. That it only comes from certain sources, and that truth, or certain people. And I think as we go throughout our lives and experience more, one things where our eyes are opened again and again is when we find edifying things which are of God, that the Spirit can testify to us are of God, when those things are found in places that we did not expect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This whole idea of figuring out truth from lots of different sources is something that the world around us, we have struggled with. I think the past 5 years and counting have shown us that misinformation and disinformation are prevalent, as is the human tendency to default to a position that other people are wrong and we are right. Sure. Right? That's like the natural inclination. And I think we've evolved to hold on to that view, to initially reject that new, the scary, the different, because it threatens that sense of self. So what does that have to do for us as believers, as Latter-day Saints? Is it possible to find a way to better navigate muddy waters? Is it possible to cut through misinformation? Is there any lessons that we can learn from D&C 50 here that can help us do a little bit better? And more specifically, what role does our own critical thinking have in determining truth from error? How do we determine right from wrong? And who decides what is right and wrong? Is it just the leaders? Is it just the scriptures? Is it just inspiration? Or is it our own logical thoughts as well? Is it an either or? Is it more of a yes and? So with that background, if we were sitting in a class and if we were to say, how do we discern truth from error? If we were in primary class and we asked the kids, how do you know what's right and wrong? The primary answers would probably be things like pray about it, follow the prophet, read the scriptures, right? And those are good answers. Those are great starting points. But if we were sitting in an AP gospel doctrine class and we say, how do you determine truth from error? Your answer might be, well, it's complicated, right? It's a little bit more grayscale and a little bit more nuanced.
I think that it's notable that the scripture passage you had me read before, D&C section 50, verses 10 through 12, talks about reasoning. Because when I think of critical thinking, I think of reason. A lot of people think that there's, logical and emotional and never the twain shall meet, or that there's critical and faith and, it's this idea that you can hold two things together that can be truth coming from different sources at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the next things that I like to introduce are 4 different areas and 4 different skill sets that we can use to help discern truth from error. Now, I think you'll probably see as we walk through all 4 of these that we're going to use them at different times in our lives. One is not necessarily better than the other. One of the frailties that we have is to default to those that feel easiest or most comfortable or most familiar, but often that comes at the expense of neglecting some of the others. So let's talk through some of these critical reasoning skills and these sources of truth that can help us discern truth from error, and let's see what we can learn. So from a spiritual perspective, one of the easiest and simplest primary answers is looking to our leaders. And in the context of this class, I would say that looks like us immersing ourselves in the culture of our fellow believers, counseling with our co-disciples, participating in regular devotion, interweaving our lives into a communal fabric of faith, and then relying on the expertise of those fellow saints that we sustain, right? This is basically us saying, hey, we need to trust the coach. They've played the game with us. They're in regular communication with the team owner. They're getting all the plays and they're figuring everything out. And they're all working from the same playbook. And they want nothing more than to see us succeed. And just like all coaches, all good leaders have a vision that is slightly different than the people that's out on the field, right? Maybe that coach is up in the play box, or maybe they're sitting on the sideline. But we need to trust their ability to guide us when we huddle together with them. So that is one excellent, wonderful source of truth, is our leaders, and by extension, everybody else that's around them. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. The next one that is very similar to them is scriptures. And for us, that looks like when we try to understand the written records of the past, and including the context in which they were written, the authorship, who wrote it, the audience, who they were writing for, the purpose in which each was written for, and the framing and the relevance, and then us filtering out and connecting the teachings of those scriptures to our modern lives and figuring out the practical applications. So just like we need to understand and listen to the coaches and the leaders that's on our team, we also need to understand the playbooks that we're coming from. I think we also need to keep a healthy, properly distanced perspective of who wrote it, for whom it was written and why, and how it was intended to be used back then and how it can be used today. Because the playbooks are never intended to provide an answer to every question, right? It's not a guaranteed play-by-play of how you can respond in every single situation. A lot of it is very situational. And so the scriptures will only be as useful to us as our proper and correct understanding of them. Okay, so those are the two. I look at these as the external tools that we can use, right? The leaders are outside of us and the scriptures are outside of us. Now let's take a look at the third one. We're going to start moving a little bit more internal. This is internal inspiration. This happens when we align our thoughts, our actions, our habits, and ultimately our behaviors with the principles of the gospel, which winds up attuning our spiritual bodies with the harmonies of divine guidance, and then trust in the quiet, illuminating influence that motivates us towards better conduct. If for those of us who were here last week, we talked about the pneuma, right? The wind, the breath, the spirit of life. You remember that? We're talking about it, the breath of God that came in and gave life to everything. Well, that's literally what the word inspiration means. It's when the breath of God goes into humankind and it gives light and behavior. The Latin root of to breathe into, inspire. That's literally what inspiration is. So somebody that is inspired has been filled with the breath of God. God has breathed into them, which means that the breath coming out of them, their words are God's words. Their actions are His actions. Bless you. And since it can come to each of us differently at different times, that means that we have to trust that that breath of God will look differently for different people. Okay. Now, before we go any further, let me pause right there and see a lot of those three things. What do you think, Jenny? Are we getting closer to truth? Does that make sense? Are you in agreement with these tools and sources of discerning truth from error?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that something that can be unique about us in our subscriptions as we go about our lives is that, when you mentioned the leaders and relying on their expertise, is that in our case, any one of us could be considered a leader at one time or another. And I think that is important because I think when we remember that can really highlight the importance of inspiration, personally, because, it can look different for everyone. And so that's something that's important to remember. I do want to take a minute to just acknowledge some of these comments that have come in. Earlier, Laurel shared the gospel and church is not easy. It's not supposed to be. Faith is spiritual. We are on earth to be the spirits that we are and learn how to exist with a body, not to only be spirits that we always were, to become our whole selves. I'm being prompted to share this. Thank you for acting on that prompting, Laurel. It reminds me of that saying that we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah.
Jamie, hello. Jamie shares, some apprehension comes from not knowing if we will be accepted or rejected by our fellows if we profess beliefs that are different from others. Absolutely. I think that that's something culturally that we could work on collectively, is being more welcoming, even not even just accepting of a difference in beliefs. Jamie also shares the scripture D&C 8:2, I will tell you in your mind and in your heart. And yes, when it comes to discerning truth and error, both things are critical. They're not just helpful, and it isn't one or the other. It's both. And then, yes, Nilda remembers from last week, something alive, Numa. Thank you.
Numa. Good job. All right. Such good feedback. Thank you so much, everybody, for chiming in. So we've talked about those three things, and there's a fourth one. You'll notice that there's a fourth section missing from the list, because in order to complete and get to the inner source or the better triangulation, this last piece is the big one. This is our own reasoning. This is us using critical thinking skills to understand the links between ideas, to determine the argument relevance, to build and appraise arguments, to identify the errors in reasoning, to approach problems in systematic ways and recognize biases, and then reflect on our assumptions and our beliefs and our values. And really, Jenny, I think this is where the rubber meets the road, because this is where we have to make our own judgment calls, right? This is where we fall back on our own levels of education, our own levels of training. And from an LDS perspective, this is us using agency, right? That's where we have to critically think through the difficult challenges and arrive at what we think is the best situation, where we say, maybe there's no easy answer that's out there. Now, using just the reasoning piece, some people feel that that looks as if it precludes the others. They say that, I'm going to reason my way out of this. I'm not going to rely on inspiration or scriptures or leaders. Or if I do use my reasoning, then how can you have faith in the leaders of the scriptures or the inspiration? And the model that we're trying to show here is that all four of those combined can help us get a better, more clear version and understanding of what is ultimately true. So we're not saying that finding truth is easy. We're not saying that finding truth is simple. We're not saying that leaders are always correct. We're not saying that scriptures are always 100% inspired. And neither are we saying that our own inspiration is always correct and that our own reasoning will always get us to where we want to be as well. What we are saying, or what I am saying, is that truth is elusive. And it usually takes multiple skill sets in conjunction and in harmony with each other to find it. And we do have the ability to approach it from multiple angles. And if we use the God-given skills and God-given talents that we have, as well as the God-given inspiration in us and through others, then we will probably get to a closer version of it than we would had we tried to attempt it with only one or several of those four. So before I go any further, Jenny, what are your thoughts so far? Do any four of these stand out to you? Does it make sense?
I love this. I think this is really impressive and applicable, and I like it a lot. I think one thing that's interesting too, and this might be a left turn, but I'll just introduce the idea, but just how because of the aspects of reasoning, which you mentioned includes critical thinking and recognizing biases, and also the element of inspiration, it's important to remember how our truth can be different from someone else's truth.
Ooh.
Because, when you mention in reasoning, talking about critical thinking, about recognizing our biases and agency, I would also include in that our personal experience, which evolves, which changes. And everything else, all the external could remain static. And what changes is our own experience, our reasoning, our inspiration based on our experience. And that alters what truth is for us, or it could. It could. And I think it's important to, again, go back to the inspiration, to check in with that, to make sure, is this something that is of God? Is this something which is edifying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the beauty of seeing this interconnected model and seeing how those four different tools kind of interplay with each other is that they can also serve as a warning where if we are relying too heavily on one at the neglect of the others, that can in and of itself be a signal that something is incorrect, that we are miscalibrated somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yes.
If all I do is listen to just the leaders or the fellow saints around me and nothing else, higher probability of me getting it wrong. If all I do is rely on my own inspiration and I say, I prayed about it, this is my personal thought and nothing else, even though it might contradict scripture or reasoning or leaders, if all I do is hold on to that, then I'm probably going to get it wrong. So these four things, they can be looked at as lenses that overlap each other, that help bring clarity. I think they can also be looked at as forces that each pull in their own direction. Mm-hmm. And the tension that exists between that is what stretches out and clarifies and brings wholeness to that version of the truth. Now, that tension can feel uncomfortable for us sometimes. And that discomfort is not a bad thing, right? We need to learn how to live in that gray, nuanced area. So with that, we also have to be aware that there are some pitfalls that can come with this. And there's a whole lot of problems that we have seen in our own church history that have come when we have fallen into one of these three pitfalls. I'd like to just talk about three of these. Mm-hmm. The next slide coming up is going to give kind of an introduction of these main things: confirmation bias, framing theory, and selective attention. All right. Let's talk about the first one first. Confirmation bias. This is what some people call the echo chamber. John, if you would go ahead and pull up the next one real quick. The idea is that in order for us to survive, our caveman brains have quickly learned how to process facts and quickly filter out the safe from the dangerous. Now, if anybody out there has ever had a phone that's had like a battery that's starting to die, or Jenny or John, have you ever had to take your phone and put it in airplane mode, thinking that you can save some battery life?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Because it conserves energy. So here's the spiritual trick, or the cognitive trick that we do. The best way to conserve energy is to shut off functions. Mm-hmm. And our brains, being the computers that they are, have the same function. They have the ability to take logical shortcuts to examine, instead of examining every piece of evidence and every possible angle. It's exhausting, right? Ain't nobody got time for that. It takes time and energy. So naturally, we will prefer those inputs that confirm what we already know, things that reaffirm our hidden biases, and reduce any amount of discomfort, because it takes less energy, because that's our brain flipping into airplane mode. John, go to the next one, please. Now, unfortunately, that also means that we would have an innate biological preference for lies that comfort us or require very little effort, rather than the truths that are unpleasant or difficult to absorb or that require extra work. So let me go back to the stories I shared at the very, very beginning. When I said I have we're sitting in a leadership meeting and I've got a person, a member of leadership that comes and says, I think your idea is kind of a bad idea. Now, so what do? Do I go into airplane mode and shut it off? Or do I listen to the person that says, oh yeah, no, your idea was perfectly fine? Or talking when we're learning about the authorship of the Bible and we understand where it came from and that challenge, they're like, no, I don't want to learn about that. I actually had one brother, God bless him, in a Sunday school class, as I was explaining that similar background, stood up and loudly proclaimed to everybody, I don't need to listen to any of this. I don't need it because it's the word of God. That's all I need. And he sat down and everyone was just kind of like, huh, okay. I think we just saw him flip into airplane mode right there in front of all of us. So this happens to us when we don't seek out the objective facts, when we interpret the scripture or the teachings to support our own existing beliefs, when we selectively remember our past or our details that uphold our beliefs, or when we ignore the information that challenges us. So we have to remember, questioning is not unfaithful. Dissenting is not apostasy. Challenging the norm when it needs to be challenged is not the same thing as destructive rebellion, right? There are times when Lamanites came and talked to the Nephites who thought that they were perfectly good, and it had to be some Lamanite standing a wall that's like, you guys, everybody's in here thinking the exact same thing. You're all inside this spiritual echo chamber, and look what has happened. God sent me, Samuel, this unpleasant person telling you the truth that nobody wanted to listen to. So that is the first pitfall that we can fall into, is this confirmation bias. All right, let's take a look at the second one. This is called framing theory, aka the curated view. So I've got a picture up here on the screen. Now we'll try to describe it for those of us who are listening to the audio version. Imagine that you see a photograph of soldiers in wartime. One person shows you a photograph of a soldier that's sitting on the ground. He appears, his head is tilted back, his eyes are closed, appears to be some sort of blood or bruising on his face, and he seems to be in some kind of distress. And another soldier next to him is offering him a canteen full of water, as if he's going to give him a drink. All right, that's one view. The second view is this same soldier sitting on the ground with his back, bruising and blood on his face, but another person on the other side of him appears to be holding what looks like some sort of a weapon, some sort of a rifle, pointing at the seated soldier's head. Now, it's actually the exact same photograph, because if you had the ability to zoom out and look at the whole thing, you would realize that both the soldier offering the canteen and the other soldier holding the weapon were both appearing in full color to be on the same side as the soldier sitting on the ground. However, one could selectively frame this picture to exclude one piece of information or the other, or to change the color from one or the other in order to drive a particular narrative if they wanted to curate the view. So Jenny, before I go any further, any thoughts or input on this idea?
On framing theory?
Yes.
Well, one thing that my husband has said a lot just over the years since I've known him, and it's actually, I think, one of the most helpful things about just kind of his personality and tendencies in interpersonal, communication with others, is he always says, well, I've got my version and they've got theirs, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think when it comes to, asking or thinking about discerning truth from error, we would do well to ask ourselves, when we see or hear things that appear to be completely conflicting, to ask ourselves, can both be true? I like how you talk about zooming out for the bigger picture, but to really consider, because sometimes we can have almost a primitive kind of reaction to this idea of try to see things from the other person's point of view, because there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes that can, depending on how that's presented, that idea can tend to feel dismissive of our own point of view.
Yeah.
But really to maybe think of it in that way, in zooming out and asking, can both things be true? Absolutely.
It's hard, because when we look at news, or whether it's politics or whatever, sometimes even in scriptural and church settings, it's usually a very emotionally charged media, right? They always go together, and there's rarely only good things that goes with it. And that can be challenging for us because the emotions that we feel sometimes get in the way of us perceiving facts critically and objectively. It's like it becomes a filter through which things get through. And sometimes that emotion can override the rational part of the brain, which leads to a distortion of reality. And that's why we've seen information warfare actually used to, try to steer us. I think we have to be aware that information is often going to be framed to fit a narrative, and it can be used to reflect and reinforce stereotypes and misconceptions. John, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and pulling up the next one. There was one famous example of this. This stems from 2005 when Hurricane Katrina, if you guys remember that, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, flooded the city, massive devastation. And on August 30th, 2 photographs were posted in the Associated Press of several different groups of people, but all participating in the same activities. When faced with floodwaters up to the chest and facing complete loss of power, supplies, clean drinking water, the natural human tendency to go out and find something to survive kicked in. And it was very common to see people across the entire demographics going out and finding supplies or trying to get whatever kind of non-perishable goods they could find. So photos of these people wading through the waters came, and they ran with the captions. There was a black man that was captioned saying, quote, he was looting from a grocery store. While another photo of 2 white people was captioned as saying they were, quote, finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. So this is a classic example of framing and the curated view. And it never, like you say, it never hurts to ask, what is the whole story? Could we zoom out and see the whole picture? But most importantly, who is framing what we are reading and what we are studying? In our LDS perspective, one of the things that I'm so grateful for in the new version of Saints, the Saints history that we have, is it seems to have been an active effort to zoom out and tell the whole story. There are more stories of women. There are more stories of people of color. There are more stories of people of other faiths. There are more stories that happen from people besides just Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Sidney Rigdon. And there are more stories of them getting it wrong and not just being 100% inspired all the time. So that certainly runs in contradiction to what the previous narrative was. And for us in this transitional era where we have seen both sides of the bridge, that can be a difficult thing for us to learn how to process, which is one of the reasons why we have discussions like this today, right? So we can learn these different cognitive tools and be aware of that pitfall that we fall through. Mm-hmm. Before we go any further, Jenny, any thoughts?
No, that's an excellent example, and we see this all the time.
Awesome. Okay, the third pitfall that I want to bring up today is what we call selective attention. Selective attention. This is also known as proof texting. It's the idea of you make up your mind first, you have your position, your belief, right? And it's usually like an instinctive gut reaction. You don't have to think about it. It's just something that you know, something that you feel. And then you go looking for proof to back it up. Now, I actually have a slightly different example. I've got a little video that I'd like to share that kind of demonstrates what this selective attention is. So special extra credit bonus for those who are watching this on the live stream. We will put a link to the video in the show notes. You can watch it and share this with other people afterward. John, if you have a video, and there is an audio that goes with it, so make sure that your audio is turned up. And in case the audio doesn't work, I'll go ahead and narrate. Go ahead.
Yep, we'll put us on mute, Ben. So give us just a couple seconds when it's over and we'll bring you back in.
Okay.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions. Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Okay, Jenny, what do you think? Have you seen this video before? Are you familiar with this idea?
I've never seen that before, just now.
All right. Did you notice the gorilla the first time it came through into frame?
I did.
You saw it right away. What was your thought when it first came through?
Well, I was counting, but the initial thought that I had, because on my periphery, I saw something black. So I thought it was someone else dressed in black until it walked through, and I was like, I did notice it. I just wasn't paying attention to it.
Sure. Notice and paying attention. Very cool. I remember the first time that I saw this, I was like, okay. And I had no idea of the context. Somebody said, okay, this is just about selective attention. I was like, I'm going to get this right. And I remember thinking, I'm going to nail this on my first try. Because it was one of those, like, try this video, see if you can count the number of times, how many people get it right on the first time watching the video. I was like, oh, I'm totally going to nail this. And I'm counting and I'm counting and I'm counting. And I thought they were going to get to the answer. And he says, but did you see the gorilla? And I remember so distinctly having that record scratch moment of, what? What are you talking? There was no gorilla there. And they rewound it. And I legit thought that they had like copied and pasted something in there. They doctored the footage, that this was like totally made up. And I realized that I had been focusing so myopically, so intense on one little thing. And here's the spiritual lesson. By focusing so intently on one tiny thing, we can literally become blind to the things that are around us, even though it's right there, right under our nose. So this is similar to the cognitive biases, and you can see hopefully how they're related. Cognitive biases and selective framing, that when we have selective attention, if we make up our mind first and latch onto that idea, and then go looking for proof of it in the scriptures or with our leaders or with our inspiration or with even our own rational thoughts, if we look for proof of it, we will probably find it, even to the point where it can make us blind to the things that are there around us. If we make up your mind that women should be subject to men, to use an example, and then you decide to go looking in the scriptures to find scriptures that back up that viewpoint, you will find it. And the same can be said for racism. The same can be said for slavery. The same can be said for violence against those of different faiths, for violence against your own government, for violence against your own brothers and sisters. Similar to using the media framing and the confirmation bias, when we use the scriptures to back up our already held view, it can become a weakness instead of a strength that we fall into. And it's especially damaging because, kind of like the gorilla in the video, we run the risk of missing out on the other truths that were there. Now, not everybody has that same response, right? Like we see Peggy says, I'm too easily distracted. I was trying to count both of the colors, and then I lost count when the gorillas made their entrance, right? That in and of itself is a fascinating response, because this can show that sometimes other pieces come in and then we don't know how to process that new information. Right? Or Jenny, like you said, I started to see something on the periphery and I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's something else there. Each of those can be wonderful. And this is actually part of the psychology experiment that was done to help us understand our cognitive tools. So what does this have to do with discerning truth from error? What do you think, Jenny? How do these pitfalls get in the way of us figuring out truth?
Well, I think they're all, to be honest, really common things that we do. I mean, and my opinion is that it all goes back to confirmation bias. Anything to help us to remain in the comfort of I'm smart, I'm capable, I'm a good person. Mm-hmm. If we can find, external things to validate that, then we will, because discomfort is so uncomfortable.
Hashtag there's the tweet. It's right there. When we read through these sections of 49 and 50, at a surface level, it's easy for us to look at that story and say, oh, those poor Shakers, they were so wrong. Aren't we so lucky that we have a prophet that helps us know right from wrong? Right. And I'm not going to lie, the first hundreds of times I've heard these lessons in seminary and Sunday school, that was our approach. We approach it from an angle of privilege, of we're on the inside and they're on the outside. Hashtag follow the prophet, everything's great. And had those Shakers only followed them, then they would have been fine. But perhaps the message is something a little bit deeper. Perhaps the message that we can get out of this is that each and every one of us is part of that Shaker community from time to time. That when we are presented with information from outside sources that challenges our existing beliefs, it can feel threatening, it can feel uncomfortable, it can feel foreign, it can feel dangerous. And in our faith, where we put such a high premium on orthodoxy, on fidelity, on orthopraxy, where everybody not only believes the same beliefs, but everybody acts the same actions and everybody worships the same worship, because if you're inside the box, you're safe, and outside the box is danger, right? Straight and narrow takes you to the tree. Anything off the straight and narrow takes you into the Gulf of Misery. When we reduce the complexity of the gray areas in our lives to a childish but misinformed black and white, we wind up causing more problems for ourselves than actually good. Now, kind of like lifting weights, this ability to feel comfortable with critical thinking and to recognize these different ideas. John, go ahead and go to the next one, would you please? These are not natural abilities, and it can feel daunting and leave us mentally sore. And this is why we present them as warnings and of common pitfalls. Like you said, Jenny, this happens to us all the time. We need to learn how to build the cognitive skills in order to discern right from wrong, as a complement to the spiritual skills of having faith in scriptures, in leaders, and our own personal inspiration. And to kind of wrap it up today, I'd like to share one last story. And hopefully all this has been building up to the story, because this story, I think, is so illustrative of how we can approach these challenges. So, true story, June 1945. There was the Improvement Era magazine, an article titled "The Ward Teacher's Message," and it was intended to help people have faith in sustaining leaders of the church. Now, listen to see if you hear any red flags. The article was written anonymously. There's no attributed author. It was labeled as having been edited by a brother named Lee Palmer. And the understanding was that because this came from a church source, this was done under the supervision of the presiding bishopric. John, go ahead and pull up the next slide. We'll have an excerpt of this letter, this article that came in the Improvement Era in 1945. From the Ward Teacher's Message, it said, for the ward teachers conducted under the supervision of the bishopric, and it talked about the teacher's duty is to watch over the church always, right? That's quoting D&C 20. And it started off by saying, no Latter-day Saint is compelled to sustain the general authorities of the church. When given the opportunity to vote on propositions of any in the several conferences, he may indicate his willingness to sustain them by raising his right hand, and he may manifest his opposition. That was good. But here's the kicker. At the end of the article, it said this, quote, when our leaders speak, the thinking has been done. When they propose a plan, it is God's plan. When they point the way, there is no other which is safe. When they give direction, it should mark the end of controversy. God works in no other way. To think otherwise, without immediate repentance, may cost one his faith, may destroy his testimony, and leave him a stranger to the kingdom of God. Okay, before I go any further, Jen, what's your gut reaction to this?
I mean, it's so manipulative.
Ooh.
To be like, oh yeah, no, anyone can sustain or not. It's up to you. You can choose to do it. Here's the way to do it, and it's up to you.
I'm just saying.
And if you choose not to, then it means you're wrong and you don't have a testimony and you're a stranger to the kingdom of God. I mean, but you choose.
I mean, you do you.
Whatever you think.
It's fine. If you want to be in the boat, no, it's totally fine. Really, I get it. Who are we to say? Now, this quote, that whole tagline, when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done, this has caused quite a bit of concern. I personally have heard variations of this in church meetings. If you go looking for it online, there are a couple of, again, bless their hearts, well-meaning brothers and sisters who have used that quote out of context with the intent that it's going to help us along the way. And sometimes we do see that the culture can start reflecting that same attitude, and that cannot be a healthy thing. The beauty and the redemption of the story is it does not end there. It actually has a much happier ending. But it got dark for a minute because some Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City were taking this copy of the Improvement Era. So again, this is pre-internet. This is when anything about the church was either published in newspapers or magazines. And in Salt Lake City in the 40s, there were lots of non-Mormons around, right? There was lots of people. There was lots of other faiths that were there. And there were folks that were going around and they were actually trying to convert the non-Mormons among them. And the story goes that a minister of the Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City had two home teachers show up on his door. They were going door to door as missionary work, and they were trying to share this message with others. And they gave him a copy of that, and that Unitarian minister read that article and then sat down and wrote a letter to George Albert Smith and dropped it in the mail and mailed it off to him. And he was concerned for the exact same reason. He says, this is manipulative. Is this really the way that you guys think? And thankfully, we actually have George Albert Smith's response to him. It is so instructive. John, if you would go to the last one for me, please. This is how President George Albert Smith responded back to him. He says, in part, quote, I am pleased to assure you that you are right in your attitude that the passage quoted does not express the true position of the church. Even to imply that members of the church are not to do their own thinking is grossly to misrepresent the true ideal of the church, which is that every individual must obtain for himself or herself a testimony of the truth of the gospel, must, through the redemption of Jesus Christ, work out their own salvation, and is personally responsible to their Maker for their individual acts. The Lord himself does not attempt coercion in his desire and effort to give peace and salvation to his children. He gives the principles of life and true progress, but leaves every person free to choose or reject his teachings. This plan, the authorities of the church try to follow. The prophet Joseph Smith once said, quote, I want liberty of thinking and believing as I please. This liberty he and his successors in the leadership of the church have granted to every other member thereof. God wants an enlightened people, and heavenly parents want us to be able to think for ourselves and to use our agency for good and to wrestle with the gray areas and these uncomfortable nuances of the right and wrong. The final thing that President Smith said, on one occasion, in answer to the question by a prominent visitor how Joseph governed his people, the prophet answered, I teach them correct principles, and they govern themselves. So, what do we have to learn from this, Jenny? What do you think?
There's a lot. This has been maybe one of my favorite lessons. There's a lot. I love what President Smith replied because, I mean, he's right. It flies in the face of agency. It flies in the face of what we are to do. And so, God bless that minister for reaching out to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tying this all the way back to D&C 50 again, it can be easy to fall into the echo chamber of we have the truth, therefore we're right. Or I have the truth that feels comfortable and therefore it is correct. And it can be easy to fall into those pitfalls, right? That confirmation bias, to selectively pay attention to those things that confirm what we already know, to frame the stories in such a way that it displays the version of the truth that I like, that I want. And if we do that, then we can become just as failed and frailty as that well-meaning good brother who wrote that article. And I'm going to assume positive intent and think that they were trying to do their best, the best that they knew how. And if we can extend a little bit of grace to them, while simultaneously learning from their lessons and their mistakes, then hopefully that would be a pitfall that I wouldn't fall into as well. And then when I find myself being presented with that new information, when I find myself on that inside of that shaker community, so to speak, then hopefully I can find enlightenment. And if that enlightenment comes from any other outside source, be it the leaders, the scriptures, my inspiration, my own rational thoughts, collectively together, they would help me find that more clear version of the truth. And I could develop that mental muscle needed to lift that cognitive burden.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. I'm kind of, I don't know what to say. Like what a great lesson. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the effort that you put into that. And thank you to John for being right here at the ready to pull up what we need to see, and for your great work in producing this. Thanks to everyone who participated in this lesson, whether here on the video, whether vocal or silent, or if you're listening to it on the podcast stream later. We appreciate you being here. I want to invite everyone back here next week, which will be Sunday, May 23rd. The lesson for that week, or this coming week, the study is called A Faithful, a Just, and a Wise Steward. It covers Doctrine and Covenants sections 51 through 57. And we will meet back here Mountain Daylight Time, between 9 a.m. and 9:20-ish. Thanks for always being patient with that as we get started when we can. Thanks again, everyone, for being here, and we will see you again next week.